start here. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Number one, continued discussion on the budget workshop. And where do we leave off, sir?
Last meeting, my mental notes was that we left off kind of in the debate of additional road work. Couple of roads came up, Hooper, west of Highway E, Piper, and Marsh Road. So one of my assigned homework pieces was to go at Marsh. I also did go look at Piper, and Hooper is kind of a foregone conclusion in my mind that it needs pulverizing pave if we're gonna do that. But that we've got a quote-ish budgetary quote, $145,000 to do Hooper. Piper, I went out and looked at, and my own opinion at this point is that it is past chip sealing, and that it probably, only from looking at the edge, there's one section, edge profile, I don't entirely know what's under that road. We potentially could overlay that road, but I don't know what's under it. There's a possibility that we could do kind of like a scratch coat, 1.5 inches, and then pave 2 over the top and leave what's there as hopefully more substantial base. But in my mind of minds, I don't know that either one of those is the best. But I also did not have a chance to look at any sort of estimated traffic count on Piper to see what the scoop is on that. We could potentially do a 1.5 inch and 2 inch, literally just overlay on that thing. And
What do they do, wedge it where it needs it, then put, you say 1.5 inches,
essentially,
what's the base layer?
binder,
Binder over the top of the old, you're saying, and then,
pretty much, yeah, we'll pretty much take out all of the, there's a fair amount of rutting in that road. On the outside wheel path, if you wanna call it, in both directions. So you can set it for 1/2 by 1.5 inches and kind of re-crown the road. And then overlay it. That I didn't put any real significant thought into because we sort of left on Marsh.
yeah.
I did go out to Marsh, in a few different perspectives. If you're coming off of Watunsky, there's about a 320-foot section that is in pretty poor shape until you get to where they wedged about 2/3 of the road. That section is 1,600 feet long, where it's, I'm gonna say, 8-year-old pavement 2/3 of the way, and then there's about a 6 to kind of 8.
Well, there's a new section of pavement.
Yeah, but it's not the entire travel lane in both directions.
The last time you mentioned, this piecemealing, something like that is bad. Do you think that, well, let's say you did everything right to the railroad tracks, or the whole section, Marsh Road, it's ours. You would grind up, pulverize that newer section too, and just take it out?
Well, so I came up with 1, 2, 3, I came up with 5 sections of Marsh Road that are in kind of varying stages of either promotion or decay. The 320 feet from Watunsky to where they wedged, then there's 1,600 feet of wedge. After that, there's there's 3,200 feet going towards Lowland. And then, there's a new, full width, new
Yeah.
section, that's part of that. And then there's 2,900 feet, roughly 3,000 feet to the tracks from where that stops. And then there's 1,800 feet from the tracks to the village limits, so I just real kind of simply went through this. 6,200 feet of pulverize and pave, 1,600 feet the new section we could chip seal, and then the 1,800 feet from the railroad tracks going east to the village. There's a chance we could chip seal it or double chip it and see what it does. I have not had a chance to reach out to the village to see where they're at with any development, construction, whatever, on their piece that's north of,
Probably not very far, because I talked to him about, shoulder, and I think shoulder work, you're gonna be down there doing it. Frank, I'm 65,000 in the hole now, I gotta figure out.
yeah.
what's stuff.
Well, no, I'm saying from there, cause they bought that property north of Marsh with the intent of developing it. I don't know where they're at with the grand scheme of the whole thing. In my own mind, their section, which used to be our section, by the time any development, construction traffic goes in and out of that road, that's gonna be garbage.
Yes,
So whether we wanna do our part, or do we wanna like double chip seal it and see if we can make it, 10 years, whatever it is, 6 years, I don't know how fast and furious they would go, and then between the section and the railroad tracks, the H is kind of combined. Because that we could apply for TRIS funding, and that would be one of those municipal cooperative projects that they look at highly, because part of it's theirs, part of it's ours, and it's one segment-ish from the railroad back out to H, so.
okay,
In any event, we're looking at like 1.25 miles of pulverize and pave, so we're at like, let's call it
300.
300 grand, yeah, roughly, which I think is a little, well, no offense, I think adding anything to what we had talked about in the 410, quite honestly, is a little steep. I get Rob's point about falling behind, but we, in my own mind, regardless of if any of us run in April or if all of us are sitting here a year from now, we gotta look at that loan payment that's gonna come 25 to begin with, but then what are we looking at for 2026? Especially if we move it beyond the total 600 that was approved. The board approved 600, up to $600,000 in borrowing. Right now, we're estimating 230,000 that we're going to need to borrow by the end of the year.
Okay.
Right, that's that $65,000 payment for next year. If we use the entire 600 grand, let's say between 2024 and 2025, we know that's 186,000 for the payment that technically would wholly come due, let's say in 2026. If we go above and beyond the 600 or 410 and 230, which is beyond 600 to begin with, but from a ballpark standpoint, we're gonna be looking at a $200,000 loan payment plus whatever else above and beyond that, and to me, that's a lot in budget. That's only $800,000 to begin with. You're at 25% of your overall budget in debt service.
Okay,
And not that we can't, the auditors, when they were here, I don't remember what the number was, but we're at like 2%, this would have been for 2023, at $170-some thousand debt service, we're at like 2% of our debt capacity. It doesn't mean that the town doesn't have the ability to borrow the money.
right,
It's whether or not the residents, number one, can afford it, and number two, or which way, support it, afford it.
do you think that we should stop at this and ask, obviously, we're in the negative 122,368. Ask for that on a levy increase and just leave it at that for the year?
It's either that or we have to borrow, I mean, one way or the other. We either need to cut expenses in the proposed budget, which we could go back and do. We could borrow for it, which would make this 410 number 540, let's just say for round numbers, 535. But that 535 is $110,000 more than what we approved for borrowing a few months ago.
So
Saying,
really,
like,
well-
so it's a snowball of everything.
So the way it sits here, the 122,368, you people have this, and we have some copies up here.
That's my fault. It's sitting behind my thing. Literally lost sight of it.
So the negative, you see that on the bottom there, the negative 122,000, that's with, that's with pulverizing and paving Tamarack Road out past Paulson's, I assume, right?
Correct, yes. And finishing the 2025 maintenance scope.
Right. So we need that to get that done, and we were given a grant of how much? 40,000?
32,000.
For that purpose of repaving, pulverizing, and repaving that road, correct? Correct.
Yes.
So we really need that. Maybe we should just leave it at that.
It's gonna get to be a bigger and bigger and bigger ask, or,
Right, but now there's something else I'm gonna throw in the fire. He's not, lawyer's not here yet, this other matter with the airport. We may have to front the tax money, I'm gonna wait for the attorney to show up here tonight. The taxes for, the airport here and bill the owners, okay, but I'm gonna get into that with the lawyer.
But how much is that bill?
Well, we're figuring at least 20,000, right? So you would,
Okay,
if we did that,
honestly, that's part of what we don't know.
yeah, that's part of what we don't.
The nerdy answer is that theoretically, it would be roughly 13 grand. But I don't know, between moving from personal property tax to real estate tax, and the fact that the village went through a reassessment this year, how that's all gonna play out. The amount of quote-unquote property tripled, the value of it, between personal property tax and real estate tax conversion. But we don't know where the village's mill rate is going to land.
you
Compared,
said 3 times?
went from 500 and something to.
525, I mean, the assessed,
Yeah.
value, yeah, it went from about 5.25 to 1.25 million.
Okay, so it's not 3 times, but 2 and some change. So there's a theory that if the personal property tax was valued at 500,000 and was taxed at like 12, that we would be looking somewhere 24, 28,000, but we don't know what the village's mill rate is going to be against that $1.2 million worth of value.
So are we worried about how fast we will get that money back from the
Well,
people at all?
what I'm gonna do, and these are all good questions, but I'm gonna wait till the attorney comes, we'll keep working on this, because I'm gonna say the whole thing again when he gets here, because I did the phone calling, the emailing, the whole thing like
Yeah.
we discussed last time.
Yeah,
So I'm gonna go into all that, okay?
okay.
But for these purposes, I threw a figure of, we may have to add another 20,000 to that, because we'll have to pay it and then get it back as revenues.
That's why I was wondering how long it might take.
Well, theoretically, they have a bill at the end of January and by the end of July.
it's more of a cash flow
Yeah,
issue, because we went from $109,000 in our, $109,000 in the LGIP savings to $400 between the end of 2022 and the start of 2023. So what is in our checkbook is what the town owns. And the overall cash flow portion of how, you know, that if, we can put numbers on the revenue and the expense side of this budget, assuming that we're gonna get payment from all the hangar owners by the end of December of 2025. What it really comes into is where do we come up with 25,000 or 12.5 grand in January and then in July, and how does that fit in the overall cash flow of what we have seen historically with the rest of O&M and everything else?
was there a question asked of Jeff at the manager airport, how long it takes him to get that money back every year, or?
It hasn't been theirs to collect. What has historically happened with personal property taxes, that they are issued a tax bill by the village, and the hangar owners are responsible to remit payment directly to the village.
Oh,
This-
the village.
Correct, because all the property is in the village of Palmyra, this included. So this is a new thing, number one, for the town to have any tax bill, because it historically is an exempt
Oh.
entity as a municipality. So we don't know what the answer is as far as how fast, you know, if people get a tax bill that says, here's your tax bill, it's $3 grand, I'm just using a number, right? You can, same as your real estate tax, you can pay all of it in January, or you can break it into 2 payments. We might get 2/3 of it in the first half of the year, and the second 25% in July, and then have to chase 5 or 8, or,
Yeah.
you know, like, who knows, we don't know, because it's never happened.
Cause I recall at one of the airport meetings or here, that Jeff was saying how there were 2 or 3 people he was still, I think it was at the airport, he was still trying to get the money from. And that all came up, that was probably about a year ago, how they said, well, if you have that to contact with them, the emails, why can't you tell them about, remember with the fixing and everything? So I was thinking, okay, if the village sends out the bill, and then they pay January or July, but Jeff must be the person the village connects with and say, hey, these people haven't paid yet? Is that how you think it works?
No, I'm pretty sure the airport is doing a similar thing with the stormwater. They
Okay.
pay the bill and then get the money back from the hangar owners.
Okay,
And I don't know if they've got it annualized, like stormwater bills come out quarterly. So I don't know if the airport has an annual payment and they front it and get it back, or if they advance, you know, if the owners cyclically have technically advanced the money ahead of time and then
Okay.
pay it. I don't. That's for the old airport commission to figure out, but yeah, I mean, realistically, if we go through airport, right, and we just, let's say we put a number of $20,000 worth of revenue that we're going to get from them, and then we go down here and we put $20,000 as an expense there, it still doesn't, like, it doesn't change where we're at.
Okay, if you
If-
do it, if you
if
do it
this-
that way, we're still at 122,000.
Right, if this revenue, I mean, here's the ugly part, we gotta front the bill and figure it out for an entire year. Then that number goes to 142. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
If it takes us 11 months to figure out who's doing what and who's on first and everything, like, then it would be 142. We can play that game, but ultimately it doesn't, it's not really going to affect where we're sitting. Theoretically, if everybody's kind of on board and we just have to work through the process.
Well, if we were gonna borrow any more money for any roads, you know, you're talking 300, that's way out of reach, okay?
Yeah.
The only one I could consider would be Hooper Road.
Yeah, and that's another 140.
Right.
You know, I in my own personal perspective, opinion on this is that if we spend $500,000 over 2 years, even though it's going to be heavy in year 2. You know, we're gonna
Right.
get a bill for 80 grand or whatever it turns out to be for Blue Spring Lake Drive. Well, if we spend 420 in 2025, it's still 500 grand over a 2-year period. It's the same theory of the 5-year road maintenance plan, is that it tries to stay around 250, but some years are up and some years are down, and at the end of it, you spend $1.25 million in 5 years. Like, that's the target. You just gotta figure out where the roads play into it. I'll say, even here or not here, I think we kinda got to that point last meeting, is that I disagree with spending more than 500 in 2 years. We've got, and for what it's worth, we resubmitted for, Thayer Road through the ARIP program. And, you know, we're talking about a couple of projects here, one way or the other, that we definitely could apply for.
Island Road.
We could apply for Island, we could apply for Marsh, we could apply for, you know, even Marsh Road specifically, right? It really is a border road. Whether we wanna carve it up from the railroad tracks to H, or we wanna carve it up from H all the way to Watonski, it's still a cooperative road between 2 municipalities. Our section is vastly larger if we do the whole thing, you know, but the TRIS funding for that would get a little goofy, because I don't wanna say we're throwing money away, but we would definitely want to only mill and overlay the 1,600 feet, because they're not gonna qualify the 1,600 feet if we wanna chip seal it. It's not gonna be part of the grant. It's gonna be the segment from the stop sign to where that is, and then from the end of that to Highway H. How we would have to apply for it.
Oh, from the stop sign to,
To-
on Jen.
From the stop sign on Watonski, if you went towards the railroad tracks,
Yeah.
to that 1,600 feet where they repaved it.
Okay,
It's past Don Miller's house,
right,
you know, back towards Lowland.
yeah,
That 1,600 feet, one of two things: we either mill it and overlay it as part of the project for a road that's 10 years old, so that it's all one surface, or we leave that chunk in the middle and we chip seal it. Well, chip sealing is not a grant eligible thing. We talked about that.
probably mill and overlay, make it all one thing.
Right.
If-
So we would just have to incorporate that 1,600 feet into what that cost is.
But this year it's out of reach.
Well, even if we apply for, so here's TRIS funding again, we applied in October of 2023, and we didn't find out until, I think it was middle of January, that we didn't get it. But the timeline is the same as what the local LRIP entitlement funding is, where we applied for that the same time we did Island Road, and we didn't get the state municipal financial agreement until June of this year. So even if we apply for a road in October, it's really going, October of 2025,
Right, that's when we can apply.
right? We apply for it, we're not gonna get the SMA from the DOT until June of 26, which means it's really a
For 27.
27. Right, and like, this is the fundamentals of keeping a road program moving, is so that you've got 2 years ahead. Like, we're looking at 2025 and we can say, okay, well, we know in 27 we're gonna spend $500,000 on Lowland. How do we want to approach that gigantic hill? You know, right now, we're still trying to march and fight at the same time, because there was zero, realistically, that was in queue for 22, 23, 24, or 25. There was nothing lined up. That's where we started in May of last year, was develop a 5-year plan, update it, get the road ratings updated, see where we fall,
So,
ask for the money, that didn't pan out, okay, regroup, what are we gonna do? You know, these are the questions that our residents either need to give us specific direction on, or we're gonna do this shit for the next 6 years, or every year it's like, well, I don't know, what are we gonna do?
I have a question, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people at the electoral electors meeting would like to know this too. You're doing different types of repairs on different roads. We don't understand, is it like top notch or just making do? And how long that specific repair is going to supposedly last on that road? So for them to see a big amount and they don't know how long it's going to last, let's say something is supposed to last for 5-10 years. At least they know that in their minds, that this is something that's not gonna happen every 3 or 4 years. I think that needs to be explained to them, if that's a possibility at the meeting or before.
I can, and I'm not trying to sound cocky, I can make everybody in the room fall asleep. If that's the level of detail, and that's the hard part with 75 people in a room, is what level of information do you give out to someone, I'm picking on you because you asked the question, someone who came to one meeting for the first time in 10 years.
Yeah.
And, doesn't care, I don't wanna say doesn't care, but doesn't care what their neighbor's road looks like, they want theirs fixed, regardless of what fixed is, they just want not what's out there. On the other hand, Frank's twin comes to the meeting and he's been to every meeting in the last 13 years and has heard the conversations forever and ever and ever and understands the background behind it. That's where we, I think, lost a few people in the weeds last year on what was the 5-year road program, what were the roads. And there was also a misunderstanding, at least by a handful of people, that we were trying to, quote, repave every road in the town in 5 years. Because some of the questions that we were asked, the same people came to me specifically in months thereafter and said, okay, so what are we gonna do? Well, we don't have any money, so we're gonna do nothing, or we're gonna borrow for it. Different person asked a question and said, I don't think you really need to repave out in front of my house. And I said, you're exactly right, that's why we planned on chip sealing it. Because they had thought that we were going to try to repave every road in the town in 5 years. That's what we were asking for $250,000 for, and I can guarantee you that that number is closer to $6.5 or $7 million that we would be asking for, and not 250. We've got 37 miles of road. It's $240,000 a mile to pulverize and pave a road. 250 grand is a combination of maintenance and capital. We had this conversation last meeting, capital pavement, meaning Blue Spring Lake Drive, right? It's a 20-year road, hopefully, from this point forward. Meaning the next time anybody paves it, hopefully, is 20 years from now. But there's things in between time. Within the first 5 years or so, you should crack seal it. If it cracks, which it probably will, because we live in Wisconsin. 5 years after that, you may have to crack seal it a second time, right before you chip seal it when it's 10 years old. By the time that it's 15 to 20 years old, depending on which road it is, Lowland Road is way different than Marsh because of traffic. So by the time you get to a point of potentially chip sealing it a second time, you're probably going to have to crack fill it maybe a second or a third time in its lifespan. You may be able to chip seal it another 5 to 10 years after that, but by that point you're probably looking at potentially doing a 2-inch mill, literally taking off the 4 inches, cut it in half, and take the surface layer off and repave it, or wait for it to kind of completely fall apart, ride it another 5 or 8 years and see. But like, there's roads in this town that haven't been paved since '74.
There's roads that haven't been paved before that, I hear.
There's roads that have never been paved at all, and they're literally just layers on layers on layers of chip seal.
But what you just said in the last 5 minutes is kind of, in a nutshell, what I think would help people understand the difference in the in-between. Okay, it's gonna possibly last 20 years, but we have to do this at 5 years, probably again at 10 years. Just something minuscule like that. I think that they would like to hear that and understand it, because it helped me.
Right.
Good.
And don't think he isn't sucking all that in and taking it in right now, that's for sure.
That's why when you said it's gonna take forever, but I think that just in a nutshell, what you did, said to me right now.
There was a lot of questions last year about a lot of different things. And Monday morning quarterbacking my own presentation, there's 3 or 4 different instances where I know that I could have portrayed information more effectively. Like the revaluation, right? There was a gal from our community that was very hesitant to approve a levy increase, which is the total amount of money we can collect, if we were gonna do a revaluation, because the mill rate was gonna go up, because properties are worth more. That's not the way that taxes work anymore. Pre-2014, absolutely. Communities would get windfalls, so to speak, when they revalued property, because if you had, it was set from a mill rate, right? Like $5 a thousand. Well, if you went from $1 million to $2 million, you literally just doubled the amount of revenue that you collected. Now it is wholly based off of 2 things, well, technically 3. One is net new construction. So your community literally got bigger or more valuable than it was the year before. Number 2 is if you want to include debt service, hang on, net new construction, or the third one is asking for a higher levy. Villages and cities have to do it via referendum. That's why you see all of the referenda everywhere for special elections. Towns have the unique opportunity to do it at a meeting with whoever is in the room. So, net new construction, ask for a levy exceedance. Hey, we want to collect more taxes. Or number 3 is you borrow for it. Those are the only 3 ways that communities can raise funding, period. We've tried, I say we collectively as 2 different genres of board members. They asked for $150,000 for 2023 and got denied. We asked for $250,000 last year and got denied. And we're already $122,000 in the hole again.
Even if we just stay right there with the 122, we need to have it because of the grant, and part of that grant, we don't wanna lose the 32
No, no.
grand or whatever it is.
And
Even if we just stop there at the 122 and did no other road projects, we need to ask for the 122.
It's either that or we figure out out of $1 million where are we gonna,
Well,
where are we gonna cut the expense? Cause if I take, I'm gonna play the game now, cause we're close enough on this budget that I can play the game, so to speak, right? We're gonna take out all the road work for next year, complete haul, we're not doing anything. That number doesn't change, it's still $122,000. It obviously decreases the overall amount of what we're spending, right, by $410,000. To get $122,000 out of a $900,000 budget is gonna be kinda challenging.
And he took that out because the money's borrowed.
Right, so it fundamentally, it weighs into ultimately what tax bills look like. 100% yes. To solve the budget problem, or the budget math problem, road work, for at least the 2nd year in a row, doesn't fundamentally change, because we don't have any money to pull $410,000 out of our ear to make it work. So we gotta come up with 122 grand, or cut 122 grand out of a total of 900.
To be honest, when we had that last meeting, I thought you did a wonderful job with that spreadsheet, but it was overwhelming. And I think that's how it came across to a lot of people. That's why I asked you if you could maybe explain that to, because I think it was just overwhelming. It was hard to, not hard to follow, but it was a lot to follow.
And that's, fundamentally, that's part of our challenge, right? Is the same 15 people come to the meeting every month or every not month, whatever it may be. And to get that brand newness worn off in 45 minutes to somebody who's never been to a meeting, obviously, is a challenge. I agree with you on being able to present information more, and at the same point, for everyone who may want to vest themselves in the public hearing or the special electors meeting, hopefully they're willing to do more homework than the 45 minutes of that meeting. It is absolutely a lot to digest. And this is a relatively small, very straightforward budget in my perspective. But there's 40 different accounts that all of it comes out of, goes into on each side of the budget,
And we won't know what the tax levy is. Are you saying that's coming anytime right now?
It should be coming in the middle of October.
So for 2 weeks to see what our actual levy is.
I'm relatively confident we're not gonna see a significant change from what this is, cause this is using net new construction, which was 2.07% this year. It's our levy from 23 minus any debt retirement times the net new construction and any new debt service. Yeah. In a very Polish, very straightforward way, that's the calculation.
So,
Last year, part of the reason why we waited, not to interrupt you, but last year, part of the reason why we waited to get the final request number was because the state had changed the way that they did state share revenues, and we didn't know what that amount calculated out was going to be, and then, how that played into the levy itself. So there was some numerical gymnastics that we were waiting for.
so basically, if we somehow find that 122, increase the levy, whatever, which is the cheapest way to pay it as we go, that gets to basically these other projects, 7 miles worth or something total, you said, with whatever we've got borrowed here, of either new construction, like out here on Blue Spring Lake, or pulverizing, paving, chip sealing, crack filling, whatever, that gets 7 miles done. And if we do the 122, that's gonna take care of pulverizing, paving, Tamarack from the village up past Blaine Paulson before you go over the hill and go up on the curve. There's a seam there they did work from Young to that point years ago, which is in much better shape, which is part of the other deal where they're gonna,
Maintenance, surface maintenance.
right, they're gonna crack seal and crack fill and chip seal.
So you had a couple of arrows up there in yellow that you were gonna look at, and thinking we could do something with those numbers, to at least lessen that 122.
Well, the state share revenues are what our payment was this year. Michelle is waiting again for notification of the state to make sure that what we've got in there is what we've got in there. The state conservancy payment in lieu of. Sorry. You break it, you buy it. That we've got to double check the timing of when the Kincaid property got sold to the DNR, because that may or may not affect that. 975 for the licenses, that was more so just a marrying. Double check that she was anticipating his business license coming in. The airport, we put that in there because I just put it in there tonight. Aside from that, the big red one is the levy. So the rest of these revenues are kind of anticipatable where they're at. expense side of things,
Go back to, you asked this question, and it just popped in my head, I got an answer for you on the dry hydrant.
can take this one, just 1 second. Correspondence from the clerk came through. Dry,
Hydrant, you had it someplace, I thought, or in a note or something. You asked about it.
oh, that was part of these two.
Well, I can tell you that I talked to Walton today, I met with the fire chief, by the way, Mike is the new fire chief.
Oh, he is?
Yeah, so. Anyway, had a meeting with him, and Walton got back to me, he said, because I told him I want a figure, I want it to make sure you're covering the expense, I don't wanna be short. And he did leave me a message, which I saved, and he said it will not cost you over $3,000, I don't even think it'll cost you that. But if it does cost more than $3,000, that's our donation to the township, that's what he said, so. So that's a fixed figure, it could be less, but it's not gonna be more. We're talking the dry hydrant out on SNR's property, at Witensky. That's a strategic spot there for getting water if something happens out there, so. We had it all, the gravel hauled in, so they could at least get to it last year for about $3,000, wasn't it? Leveled off, and, then the hydrant didn't work. So it must be cracked in the ground or something. So that would be the expense of that, and that's important for property and life.
So do we want to change, I mean, is that something we're gonna try to get done this year?
Yeah, he said that he could do it this year without a problem.
'Cause I can,
But we'd have to vote on that at the next
Yeah.
regular meeting.
I'm just thinking, look at that one. Highlighted.
Yeah, you're gonna put it in 24, that's what you're doing.
Yeah, that's, they went from 59 for the Q3 payment to 62. You gotta touch base with Michelle yet on her estimate for election expense this year, that's why that one's highlighted. The auditor, she did email Johnson Block on Thursday, I think, yeah, it was Thursday, it was the day after the last budget meeting, to ask him for a quote for next year. The assessor, oh, that was up there because we were doing the conversating on, market update, so this realistically can go away. Payroll tax is done. Highway and street, point of contemplation, tree service. That's the airport thing I added tonight. Waiting for that number. I think she said it was 340, but she was gonna double check. And the loan amount, which,
One thing I do wanna mention, I was gonna say it before. We got 122, you know, we borrowed money, but 2 years ago, when we took over, we were paying 90,000 plus in debt service already. Last year, your taxes and mine went down, because we didn't increase the levy, and we got rid of debt service, so they went down, I think, mine went down 15.3 or something %. So when you look at what we've been paying because of the borrowing for Little Prairie Road in the past, and that was 700 and some thousand,
Yeah.
right? 700 and some thousand back in the day.
yeah, something like that.
So you're looking at, if we borrow the whole 600, that payment is 186,000 for 4 years. Well, we haven't borrowed the whole to, what did you say, 230 or something like that.
That's 260 silver.
So, follow me though, so, and then we got rid of debt service this year of what, she just paid it off 53,000. So that's a bunch of debt service that's completely gone away, even though we take on more debt service. It's not gonna be as, we were used to paying the 90 or 100,000 in debt service, is what I'm saying, for several years. Now, all that's gone, now, let's say the worst scenario, 186 comes back at us. That's 86,000 more. But we still need the 122 to get the road project done. Tamarack Road, that's important, that's terrible. There's only one, I think, worse than that, but it's not bad, that's like a -1, it's like, Hooper Road West, Mill Road, etc. But, Lowland Drive is terrible.